All right, let's set the stage for a philosophical duel that's been raging for centuries. In one corner, you've got Thomas Hobbes, the guy who champions absolute order. And in the other, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the defender of absolute freedom. You see, their fight is over the biggest question there is. How are we supposed to live together?
So let's just get right into it. Think about it. Every single law you follow, every right you think you have, all the protection you expect from the government, it all boils down to this one fundamental choice. Do we build a society that protects us from our own worst impulses, or one that tries to set our best selves free? That's it. That's the heart of the battle between Hobbes and Rousseau.
Okay, so let's get to know our two main contenders. You have to understand, their ideas didn't just pop out of nowhere. No, they were forged in the fire of their own pretty chaotic and world-changing times.
First up, Thomas Hobbes. He actually said fear and I were born twins because his mom went into labor when she heard the Spanish Armada was coming. Seriously. And he lived through the English Civil War, this absolutely horrific time of violence that completely convinced him that the greatest evil is chaos and the greatest good is order. Then you have Rousseau. He was this total outsider in the high and mighty society of Paris. He looked around and believed that all these things we call civilization, art, science, institutions, had actually made us worse, that they'd corrupted our natural goodness. So right from the start, you've got two guys with two completely different outlooks on life.
So for round one, let's look at their visions for humanity before any government exists, and what they both called the state of nature. What are we really like deep down when we're left to our own devices?
For Hobbes, the state of nature is an absolute nightmare, a constant war of all against all. His logic was that we're all basically equal, even the weakest person can kill the strongest with a bit of trickery, and resources are limited. This locks us into a never-ending fight driven by three things: competing for stuff, being terrified for our own safety, and wanting glory. It's a world with no creativity, no progress, just the constant, paralyzing fear that you're about to die a violent death.
Rousseau, on the other hand, looks at that same blank slate and sees, well, paradise. He imagined what he called the noble savage. This isn't a person driven by fear. Nope. They're guided by two simple instincts: preserving their own life and feeling compassion or pity when they see others suffer. In his world, nature provides plenty for everyone, so there's no reason to compete. We're free, we're independent, and we are perfectly happy. It's civilization, he says, that comes along and ruins everything.
I mean, what's so wild here is just how completely opposite their conclusions are. For Hobbes, the default setting is fear, which leads to total war. For Rousseau, it's happiness, which leads to peaceful harmony. And this fundamental disagreement about where we start from, it's going to dictate absolutely everything that comes next.
So, if we start in these two wildly different places, why on earth do we even bother forming societies? Well, that brings us to round two, the social contract. How do we actually leave this state of nature and agree to let someone else govern us?
For Hobbes, the logic is just inescapable. If you want to get out of that nasty, brutish, and short life, you have to use your brain. Reason tells you that you need peace to survive. So we all make a deal, a social contract. But here's the kicker. It's not a deal we make with a ruler. It's a deal we all make with each other. At the exact same time, everyone agrees to give up their right to do whatever they want, and we hand over all that power to one single, all-powerful authority, what he calls a sovereign.
But Rousseau just slams on the brakes here. He says, hold on a minute. The first social contract that ever happened wasn't some rational agreement. It was a scam. He argues that the second someone put a fence around a piece of land and said, hey, this is mine, the whole idea of private property was born, and with it came jealousy, inequality, and competition. So, to protect all their new stuff, the rich tricked the poor into creating a government. They promised peace, but what they were really doing was just locking in their own power and advantage.
Rousseau's answer is to create a legit social contract. And for him, it's not some one-time deal where you surrender all your power. No, it's a constant, active process. Every single citizen puts their own power and will into a kind of collective pot, and that pot is governed by what he calls the general will. You don't give up your freedom, you actually transform it into something new.
And that leads us right into the final round, the ultimate showdown. What kind of ruler actually comes out of these two different contracts? Is it an all-powerful king, or is it the will of the people themselves?
Hobbes calls his sovereign the Leviathan, named after a giant biblical sea monster, and for good reason. It's supposed to be a mortal god, an entity with absolute, total authority.
Its power can't be divided up or challenged in any way, because the moment you do that, you risk throwing society right back into the chaos of the state of nature. For Hobbes, you get one choice, the Leviathan or the war of all against all. There is absolutely no middle ground.
And when he says total power, he means total power. The Leviathan controls the military, it writes every single law, it's the judge in every dispute, and it even gets to control which ideas and religions are allowed. In this system, whatever the Leviathan says is justice. Its only job is to keep order no matter the cost.
Rousseau's sovereign, well, it couldn't be more different. It's not a person, or a king, or a committee. It's an abstract idea, the general will. This is the collective will of every citizen, which, by its very nature, always aims for what's best for the entire community. In his world, the people themselves, as one collective body, are the one and only true sovereign.
Okay, so how do we find this general will? It sounds a little tricky, right? Well, Rousseau makes this really important distinction. He says each of us has an actual will. That's our selfish, irrational side. You know, my actual will might be screaming for a huge tax cut so I can buy a new TV. But we also have a real will. That's our rational, higher self that knows what's actually good for everyone. My real will understands that tax money is needed for things like hospitals and schools, which in the long run benefits me too.
The general will is what you get when you filter out all those selfish individual desires, and you're left with the rational consensus of everybody's real will. And this is so key. It's not just the will of all, which is just what the majority happens to want right now. It's the will for all, what is genuinely, rationally best for the entire community.
So here it is, the final face-off. For Hobbes, power comes from a single ruler, and your job is to obey. Period. Rebellion is the worst thing you can do. For Rousseau, power comes from the people, and your job is to be an active participant. And that leads to his most controversial idea: if your selfish, actual will makes you break the law, the community can force you to be free. In other words, they can force your short-sighted self to follow your own higher, rational self for the good of everybody. Now, you can probably see the danger here, right? Critics have pointed out for centuries, who gets to decide what the general will is? It's a concept that a dictator could easily twist to crush anyone who disagrees, all in the name of freedom.
This whole duel of ideas, it didn't just end back in the 18th century. It's still alive. It echoes in basically every single political debate we have today about the right balance between the power of the state and the rights of the individual.
So what's the big takeaway here? It really comes down to two very different offers on the table. Hobbes is telling us, surrender your messy, chaotic, natural freedom, and in exchange, this all-powerful state will give you security. Rousseau tells us, no, transform your freedom, merge it with the collective, and by obeying the laws that we all give to ourselves, we can find a higher, truer kind of liberty.
And that just leaves us with the question that's as real and urgent today as it was 300 years ago. It's the essential trade-off, isn't it? So, where do you stand? In this search for a better society, which path would you choose? The one that promises safety or the one that promises freedom?